Doing chapter 11 today, which is healthcare professionals. This chapter is important because sure, we need to know management principles and everything related to healthcare management. We also have to know about the people we work with or we're going to work with. And so that's pretty much what we're going to talk about today. As you guys probably already know, which is why you're here in school, the healthcare industry is growing and it's expected to produce the largest number of jobs out of all industries between now and 2020. What that means is that you guys have pretty good opportunity as far as job security and stability goes. Our RNs, our registered nurses, currently make up about 60% of which are in hospitals. For the physicians, majority work in metropolitan areas. Physician assistants, about 50% of them work in practices, 25% work in hospitals, and the rest work in outpatient care. And what we're going to do is kind of discuss each of these different types of groups, or get as far as we can. So we'll start with physicians. Something that people don't often know is that pre-medical students can pretty much get a degree in whatever they want. Doesn't necessarily have to be chemistry or biology. They can major in English or sociology. To get into medical school, sure, they have to have certain classes that they have to take, but they can major in whatever they want. For physicians to graduate, again, they still need to have a good foundation in math, science, biology, etc. And as you guys probably know, medical school is very competitive. They also have to have good scores on the MCAT, which is the medical college admissions test. Residency training. Before physicians can actually go out and freely practice as doctors, they have to go through residency. The length of residency depends on what area they plan to practice in, to work in. But basically what happens is there's a national residency matching program, and it matches the graduate students up into a residency program. As I said, residency time lengths vary. They can be as short as 2 to 3 years, and they can go all the way up to 10 years. It just depends on the area that you're specializing in. Typically, the more complex surgery areas are the ones that have the longer residencies, as opposed to family practice, internal medicine. They're going to have the shorter residency terms. After they finish their residency, then the physicians are able to take their board certification test, and then they can practice independently. Residency work hours. In the past, residents worked a ton of hours. I'm talking about tons and tons of hours you wouldn't even imagine. In 2011, they put a rule into place that residents could not work more than 80 hours a week, and they could not work more than 24 continuous hours. Even this sounds kind of out there, so just imagine what they were working before. The other thing that was put into play is that they had to increase the use of contract physicians, mid-level practitioners, physician assistants, and nurse practitioners. And healthcare organizations had to realize that they may need to hire ancillary staff and professionals to do other tasks that were being previously done by residents to make sure that they stay within their work hours. Physician licensure. Most physicians have to get a license to practice medicine after 1 year of postgraduate training. So again, I'm going to say this. If you're going to a doctor that doesn't have a license, you may need to reconsider some things, because most physicians need to be licensed. Most licenses are granted by the state, and they're not just required for physicians. Most nurses also need to have certain licensure, and a few other types of healthcare providers as well, like physician assistants will also need licenses. Criminal background checks also done to, make sure that these people are legit that are getting these licenses. Some had increasing concerns about alcohol and drug abusers, which I hope you guys realize can also be doctors. I mean, they have access right there to tons of drugs, and they have money to purchase tons of alcohol. So this is the reason, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why they have to also go through criminal background checks. If someone's background check comes back and shows convictions, then the boards review the application, look into all of that stuff. They look at, you know, if it was a one-time thing or if it's multiple occasions. They look at what it was, and they take all of that into consideration when they're trying to decide if they're going to approve them or not. For board certification, physicians can submit their information regarding training, education, residency to the American Board of Medical Specialists, and they review it. If they approve it, then the physician is designated as a board certified whatever, in whatever specialty it is. So it could be a board certified neurologist or a board certified pediatrician. So each specialty has their own certification. Certifications are time specific. So after 2 years, they may have to reapply or renew their certification. So you may have a physician that's licensed by the state, but not certified. You may decide you don't want to go to that physician if they're not certified. Some physicians that aren't certified may be fine, but it's something else you want to look into when you're trying to choose your doctors.
Can they still actively practice without being certified?
Yeah, basically the certification is very similar to like continuing education. So this basically means they may not have been keeping up with their continuing education. So if you want to go to a doctor that's not up on the newest trends, or you know what I mean, up on their continuing education, that's on you. If they're still licensed, then you can technically, they're legit and you can go to them. But I personally want my physicians to be licensed and board certified, because that tells me that they've kept up on, you know, their continuing education. Good question. Any other questions?
I have one more.
Yeah.
The residents, those long hours they work, was it something kind of like, because I know like some training in the military, they keep you up for long to give you that that stress, like train how you fight. Is that why they were doing that to the doctors? Or?
I don't know if that's the reason why or not, but at one point it was basically free labor. So most organizations probably was like, why not? Right, let's just do this instead of having to pay a doctor. They do the same thing, or I mean, that could have been one of the reasons, but I'm not sure. I definitely know cost was probably a factor also, that it was basically free labor. Any other questions? So, for a physician to get privileges at a hospital or to get hired at the hospital, there's a few different checks they have to go through. So for instance, board certification is usually one check or proxy that they use to decide if they're going to give that physician privileges at the hospital or hire them. And the process of checking these physicians is called credentialing, and we're going to talk a little bit more about credentialing in a little bit. But it's important to know that all of these, you know, the licensure, the certification, all these things play into if an organization decides if they want to bring that physician on board. Continuing medical education. Most states will require physicians to complete a certain number of hours of CME credits, continuing medical education, to maintain their state licensure and to demonstrate continued competency, which is what I was just talking about. The continuing education and the certification is what demonstrates continued competency. Yes, I was a great physician 10 years ago, but how am I now? My certifications speak to the fact that I am still competent as I was 10 years ago. Some hospitals may also require CME credits from their physicians in order for them to remain credentialed at the hospital. The Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education is basically what establishes the criteria for determining what education resources they can use as CMEs, basically. So now we're back to credentialing. What is credentialing? Well, the formal definition is physician credentialing is the process of verifying information that a physician supplies on an application for staff privileges at a hospital, HMO, or a healthcare organization. So basically what they're saying here is, just because a physician fills out this great application, looks great, we can't just go off of what's on paper. Credentialing is the process of actually checking off everything that's on their resume, on their application to make sure it's legit. Why? Because people lie. Everybody lies. Everybody lies. So you have to check it, because if you don't, you as an organization can be held liable if something happens and that position is not legit. Cases have happened before where people have been working, acting as doctors and were not licensed, had, not finished medical school, whatever the case may be, that were not legit. And organizations have been held liable because of that, because somebody did not provide the adequate credentialing process that they were supposed to vet for this position.
How can they do that?
What do you mean?
But it was a guy in the news, I think it was like in 2012, but it was in the news recently that he was going to court and he had his own practice, but it was illegit, like nothing, everything was falsified about it, but he was working like he was really a doctor and had people working up under him. And
Yeah, I was told it happened here too in
Yeah.
Fear.
Oh,
Yeah, some years back. It's hard for me to put a finger on how it happens. There's all types of things that can happen. People can falsify records, if people would have money, they can pay for, certain things to happen. They can pay for certain people to be their reference if somebody calls them. These days with technology, it's easy to replicate certificates and licenses. I don't know how it happens, but it happens. I think it happens more than people think. So the credentialing process is very important. Most organizations will have a separate credentialing department, and this is all they do every day, all day, is check all these records for the different physicians to make sure everything's legit. So, you may decide you want to eventually work in a credentialing area in healthcare management. Yeah.
They don't have like the national database?
They do.
They do?
Yeah, yeah.
People still get.
We'll get to it. Yeah,
Great.
there is a national database though, to answer your question. There's several. Credentialing is very time consuming. It takes a lot of time, a lot of work. And obviously it's something that is continuous. You have to do it every time a doctor gets recertified or gets a new license in something. The credentialing department has to check it. So you're always busy. You always have something to do because everybody's dates are going to fall on different times. So you always have work if you're in the credentialing department. When physicians apply for privileges at a hospital, they have to specify a few things, not just what they want. They have to specify what area they want to work in, so what specialty, all the way down to procedures. A general surgeon may come in and say, I'm a general surgeon, but I only want to do appendectomies here at your hospital. So they have to be very specific. That way, the people in the credentialing area can know exactly what to check for when they're doing their research. The hospital must conduct diligent research, keyword diligent, research on the surgeon before granting privileges. Or, as I said, it can be held liable in court for allowing an incompetent physician on its staff should there be a bad outcome. So I want to make sure that's clear. All this research can't be done haphazardly. It has to be very diligent. There has to be checks and balances to make sure everything is legit. It's preferable to make sure that you get primary verification and documentation. Basically what this means is contact each place by phone and obtain original documents, such as transcripts. So we wouldn't want a copy of a transcript. We would want the actual transcript with the brand on there from the school that's sealed. Those types of things are what are considered as diligent research, as opposed to just asking someone for a copy of a transcript. Copy of a transcript is much easier to replicate rather than an official transcript with a school seal and all that stuff on it. So those are the types of things that go into credentialing process. After the credentialing department has done their thing, they've done due diligence, the materials are then submitted to the department that is the credentialing committee, usually made up of physicians. So each organization will have a committee that reviews all of this paperwork after the credentialing department has gone through it. And then after that committee or group approves it, it doesn't stop there. Then the documents are forwarded to the medical executive committee. Usually this is headed up by the chief medical officer of the hospital. And then the final step is the board. The board has to approve every physician that gets privileges at a hospital. So this is a long process. A physician doesn't just walk through the doors of a hospital and say, I want to work here, and they get hired the next day. It's a process that usually takes months. By the time the credentialing is done, it goes through all the committees that it needs to go through and then get approved by the board. So it's typically a long process. At that point, the board will either say yes or no. If they say no, physician doesn't get privileges. If they say yes, physician gets privileges, and then they can start working at the hospital. As I said, it takes time. The process usually takes 3 to 6 months. If it's issues or questions about the application, it could take even longer. I've seen them take longer. So as a manager or leader, what's your role in all of this? Well, you may find yourself working in, like I said, you may end up working in a credentialing department or a physician relations department, and you might be responsible for doing some of this work and checking to see if these documents are legit and to see if the physician is legit. If you work in credentialing, you have to have great skills because at some point you're going to be communicating with the physician and a lot of different people. So you have to have good communication skills, good interpersonal skills. You have to be very organized. You have to have good eyes for detail, and you have to be able to look at and see inconsistencies in data. Well, why was there a 10-year gap between medical school and first job? Those types of things are what might be considered inconsistencies in data. So you have to have an eye for that. As I just said, gaps in resumes. Since physicians are usually tracked from the moment they graduate from medical school, one thing you want to verify is that there are no gaps in their resumes. So again, if there's years and years between someone graduating and working, that's going to be a red flag. You don't want to question that. You want to question everything. If something doesn't look right, if you're working in credentials, you want to question it if something doesn't look right. Because again, you don't want to be held liable for anything.
The question, so if someone say to no fault of your own, someone slips through the cracks, is the manager going to get fired for that?
I mean, it's hard to answer that. It depends on what happens. If it's an outcome where somebody dies, maybe. Is it the manager's first time, something like that happening that has slipped through the cracks, or have there been other times where they let things slip through? Where it just depends.
Come on, just one more question.
Yeah.
Sorry, somebody missed it. Remember, I think you're the one that posted the article about the nurse, and she was actually just a CNA, and then she was practicing as a nurse earlier in the semester. So nurses don't go through that.
Some do.
Process.
It depends. It depends on the organization. It depends on what kind of nurse it is. If we're talking about a nurse practitioner or a CRNA, someone that's a certified nurse anesthetist or something like that, their process is going to be more rigorous than an RN. But even RNs in some organizations do go through a certain level of credentialing as well. Yeah. Because they have licenses, so we have to make sure that their licenses are legit as well. Now, they won't have as long as of a process where it goes through several committees and the board and all that. The board doesn't approve every nurse that gets hired, but for physicians, they do. Yeah. Any other questions? Good questions, fine. Questions are fine. As we've talked about, there's people out there that are imposters that may work or act as physicians that are not. Sometimes they're not just from here. Sometimes they're from other countries. And they may say that, I got my MD degree in India or, wherever, Asia or Europe, which is fine, but a degree there and licensure there may not be equivalent to what is here in the U.S. So even though they could very well be a doctor, they may have went through medical school and everything in another country, they still have to be vetted for here in the U.S. because that's where they work. So you just have to be very leery. You have to check for these types of imposters to make sure that you get all the verification that you need to get, because it does happen. For instance, if you call a school, nobody knows anything about this person, or the school's not there anymore, or something like that, might be some red flags. You might want to dig a little deeper. As you asked about before, there are several different national databases where you can do some research. One is the National Practitioner Data Bank. This database was created to try to help identify physicians who may have participated in unprofessional behavior. So this is a website you can go and pull up and search. I think you can search by different parameters, so location, name, specialty, things like that. And you can pull up information on physicians. IMGs are international medical graduates. These may be U.S. citizens that attended school somewhere else. I have a friend that went to medical school in the Caribbean and then came back and did all the necessary steps to be licensed here. So as an example, that friend of mine is considered an international medical graduate, but works and practices here as a physician in the U.S. 60% of IMGs are in primary care, 75% are in direct patient care, and the top countries that send physicians to the U.S. are India, Cuba, and the Philippines. You'll find that most of these graduates work in areas that other people don't want to go to. So inner city areas and rural areas are mostly where you'll see the IMGs. There's certain tests and things that they have to pass, like English language, clinical skills assessment, written exams before they can apply for residencies. Some people question the quality of care. They may say, oh, well, they went to school somewhere else. Their quality of care may not be as good as those that have received education in the U.S. Well, a study in 2010 was done that showed that their quality of care is just as good as those that received education here in the U.S. So what's the physician workforce like? There's a shortage now, and the shortage is only expected to increase. Most of this is because a good number of physicians are getting older in age, and so a lot of them are going to be retiring soon, and the number that's retiring is not equivalent to those that are going into medicine. So the shortage is going to grow. Another reason why the shortage may grow is because it's different outlooks on quality of life now. So the younger physicians have a different take on quality of life. They're wanting to work less weekends, less hours. So that's also going to contribute to the shortage as well. What that means is we may see a growth of the international medical graduates. If we have a shortage here of physicians, we may see more of them to help fill the shortage. Another thing that's happening is that some physicians are leaving their own practice to go work in a hospital for multiple reasons. One of the big reasons is money. They're losing money, their reimbursements are getting cut, and they just can't afford to keep their doors open anymore. So some of them are moving to work as employees of the hospital. So that's another trend that we should look for that's already starting to happen. That's, I think, only going to increase as the reimbursements continue to get cut. Conflicts of interest sometimes occur with physicians. We have to be mindful of that. Any gifts or financial incentives to doctors, we can't do it. It's not ethical, it's not legal. If we're trying to get the physician to refer more patients to our hospital, we can't give them gifts or financial incentives. It's just not something that we can do. So there's limits. For instance, anything more than 100 pharmaceutical and medical device companies cannot do. So if they give them a gift, it has to be less than that. In the past, they've given luxurious gifts, trips, golf clubs, all kind of things that were way more than $100 in exchange for scripts, patients, all kinds of different stuff. How do we keep physicians from retiring or leaving the workforce? We can offer them part-time employment, say, we really want you to stay on staff at the hospital, would you mind just working 20 hours a week as opposed to 40? We can also make sure that we do some mentoring. Mentoring might help to improve satisfaction with them as staff at the hospital, or we can use them to mentor a younger physician, and that may give them a higher sense of fulfillment and entice them to want to stay on a little longer and work at the hospital. We'll talk about nurses a little bit since we're getting close to running out of time. As you guys know, the nursing area is definitely growing. A lot of schools around here have waiting lists. It's not as easy to just get in as it has been in the past. Nursing education can now be obtained through many different avenues. So we have community colleges, four-year colleges, all offering different degrees in nursing, which is great. It's going to help to fill the demand that we have. So obviously you can get the option, you can do the option of getting a BSN, which is an undergraduate nursing degree. As you guys probably know, it's a pretty rigorous process. You definitely have to be into your biological sciences. You can apply for admission as long as you complete a minimum of 42 undergraduate credits that include the sciences and English composition. Obviously, admission is based on GPA. One holdup is faculty. Don't have enough nursing faculty. It's causing a shortage. If we don't have teachers, we can't have students, right? So the shortage in faculty definitely affects the slots for nursing students. The other thing is that we need faculty to supervise them in their clinicals. So again, if we don't have faculty, we can't have the students. The NCLEX stands for National Council Licensure Examination. It's something that nursing students have to pass to get their license. The pass rates on here are basically a proxy for quality of nursing schools. So schools that have lower scores are looked upon as schools that aren't as great compared to schools that have really high scores from this. So a top goal for most schools that have nursing programs is to have high scores on this exam. In the past, within hospitals, most of them kind of have just thrown nurses into their department or units after not having a lot of training or orientation. As a result, it obviously affected turnover. So nursing turnover was really high. People were quitting. They weren't feeling like they were trained properly. And whether you know it or not, turnover is very, very expensive, specifically for nurses. And it can sometimes be up to $65,000 per nurse. You say, that's a lot of money. Why is that the case? Well, if our nurse quits, a nurse isn't a position that we can necessarily go without. You have to have a nurse. So what do? We have to call in a temp. A temp is obviously going to be more money than just hiring a regular nurse. And depending on how long you have that temp nurse in there before you can find someone else, that turnover cost just keeps building. In addition to that, we may have to pay others overtime to help fill that slot as well as the temp. All that plays into your turnover costs. So nursing turnover can be very, very expensive to a hospital. Now, if you factor that into not just one nurse, but several nurses quitting, we can get up into the millions of dollars per year when it comes to nursing turnover. So it's definitely a big deal. So what about our new nurses? They obviously worry about, have a few concerns. They're probably pretty nervous when it comes to talking to the doctors, communicating with the doctors, which is understandable. And they also have a certain fear about just how they're going to handle the patients. Am I going to do a good job? Am I going to do the right thing? All those types of things. New nurses, there are also residency programs for nurses, for specific nurses. those that work in the ICU or the CCU or trauma centers, those types of areas. Those residencies give the new graduates more education and training, which can kind of ease some of those concerns that they have when they're just coming out of school. The residency programs that are top-notch are the ones that obviously increase the confidence in the nurses, and in turn are the ones that help with retention and reduce the turnover. The CCNE is the Commission on Collegiate Nursing Education, and in 2008 they created some standards for accreditation that they wanted to implement in 2009. Basically what they said was that to get the accreditation, there's several steps or procedures that had to be done. So, you know, we talked about nurse turnover. We talked about potentially why they might leave. We're gonna talk about it a little bit more. Maybe they are feeling overworked. A lot of times nurses do get overworked. They do a lot more work than they initially come on thinking they're going to do. They're not always paid for it appropriately. And unfortunately, they are also sometimes disrespected. Not just by physicians, but other people as well. They also might leave because they have concerns. Maybe they just physically can't do the work anymore. You know, I'm 50 years old, I can't continue to handle the physical requirements of the job. I can't do it anymore. Maybe my workload is just getting way too much. Or I just don't have any support. I don't have any help. Nobody's helping me from other departments. These are all reasons why the nurses might leave. Nurse-physician relations, we talked about a little bit. It's very interesting if you have ever worked in a hospital, or when you do go to work in a hospital, to see the relationship between nurses and physicians. For a number of reasons, it can be a very dynamic relationship, just because a lot of nurses do have a certain level of fear with physicians. Sometimes physicians don't look at nurses in the light they should with regards to respect, and all of that plays into the relations. Obviously, I think you all would understand that the better the relations is, the better it's going to be for our patients. If we have physicians and nurses working together, our patients are going to have a better outcome with their care, as opposed to providers that aren't getting along, or providers that don't feel respected or being mistreated. Another thing that it had to do with early on was just the light that women were held in. Earlier, back in the day, like in the 70s, you know, women didn't have as much power then, they weren't respected as much then as they are now. So, you know, for some of the older providers, some of the older physicians, they may still somewhat be stuck in those mindsets, and that may also play into the relations, as well as just the educational gap. You know, I'm a physician, I have an MD, you're just a nurse, you don't have the same, you know, credentials that I have. Those types of things also play into the relations as well. As I said earlier, when nurses are overworked, when providers in general are overworked, it obviously is going to affect the quality of care. The more overworked they are, this is going to increase the ratio of mortality, which we don't want to happen. Everybody understands that's death. So we want to make sure that our nurses are happy, they're not overworked, because this all ultimately affects our patient care, which is the reason we're in business. Obviously, more education we have, the better our care is going to be. There's been studies that show that nursing training and education obviously lead to better outcomes and lower patient mortality. While nurses are expensive, we want to make sure that we have enough nurses to tend to all of our patients, so that the ones we have don't feel overworked. And you'll find that more organizations are looking to hire RNs with a bachelor's degree or higher now, as opposed to the other options for RNs. I think I'm gonna stop there, because I wanna have time to explain to you guys about what we're gonna do on Thursday.
I have a real quick question.
Yes.
With an associate's degree RN and a bachelor's degree RN, the technical part of it is the same, right? The bachelor's, is it just more